Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's called How to Desire. The understanding of the 19th century industrial practice will seem obvious to the point of cliche in the 21st century, but in the 1840s, much of what was going on has simply not been named. By adding that mainstream society can find works for the cry of the children's help shift popular opinion against such practices, and in 1844, the second in the sequence of factory arts, which will shorten children's working hours, increase their compulsory schooling hours, and institute major factory reforms in factories. As a result, in spring 45, Elizabeth has asked for a poem by the Anti-Corn Law League, which campaigns against the protectionist legal tariffs on which wheat imports that, along with cartel-type arrangements between domestic landowners, keep the price of this staple so high that people are starving. Under pressure from her father and brothers, Elizabeth declines, instead donating money to the cause. As she does so with regret, her excuse as a woman will not know that women are subject to various influences, audibly contorted by the inimical impulses of domestic probity and passionate desire to lift my voice in the poetry as high as my heart. In December 1845, however, she starts work on another political poem. The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point tells the story of an enslaved woman who is raped by her owner after they've killed her partner. The woman murders the resulting child, whose color betrays the rape, and is hunted down and flogged to death. Here, too, Elizabeth makes oppression turn itself into the engine of resistance, pitching the status quo upside down. The narrator is revolted by the baby's white face as her persecutors are dismissive of my black face and black hand. Given Elizabeth's firmly background, this is a revolutionary vision, which is perhaps why it takes her a year to write. She doesn't publish the poem while living under her father's roof, but it demonstrates how, in giving up her belief in him, she's free at last to give it up believing in slavery. Perhaps it is easier to be publicly a abolitionist than to oppose Britain's corn laws, since now that the country has outlawed slavery, it can be distanced as a purely American crime. The Runaway Slave will be published in the American Abolitionist anthology, The Liberty Bell, in 48, although Elizabeth sends it to James Russell Lowell in New England at the end of 46. This is a verse as public speaking, aiming to create a moral catharsis, in which shared emotion leads to shared moral insight. Such an elevated view of poetry's social role comes so much as in Elizabeth's works that thought from her classical education. After all, Homeric epic celebrates public political ethics. This places poetry exceedingly at the heart of contemporary debates, but it can also be inhibiting. Morally necessary conclusions may leave little room for poetry ambiguity, but effort to be persuasive can make a poem over radical or simplistic. Yet the fiercely inhabited psyche of the runaway slave, together with the poem's obsessional iteration of black and white, first as colors in the non-human natural world, but also as a racist construction of human identity, create a genuine feeling of terror and hyperreality. I look at the sky, the clouds are breaking on my brain. I am floating along as if I should die of liberty's exquisite pain, in the name of the white child waiting for me in the death dark. It works so well indeed that this is sometimes taken as effective as evidence of Elizabeth's anxiety about her own possible African Caribbean heritage. After all, it's in December 45, while working on this poem, that she sends Robert her famous Blood of a Slave letter, but the assumption of reductive. Elizabeth is turning such prevailing prejudices in their head. In her poem, it is whiteness and all that it means, the abuses, the power relations, that is disgusting. That is possibly the mixed heritage haunts the West Indian plantocracy of poetic justice, of course, but it is a haunting, and just as it can't be proved to Elizabeth's case, it is no more than rumor in Robert's. Claim that his maternal grandmother, Margaret Tittle, was the daughter of an enslaved woman are simply untrue. Her mother, Margaret Strachan, was the daughter of St. Kitts surgeon, Dr. George Strachan, while her father was Reverend John Tittle, was an estate manager and legal representative for the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel. In fact, during 46, Elizabeth is also secretly working on what will become a famous marker not of African Caribbean but of her possible Portuguese heritage. The 44 love poems that will eventually be published as Sonnets of the Portuguese. In both these sequence and in different ways, The Runaway Slave, it's as if she has finally caught her breath enough to speak out, producing personal poetic liberty, and isn't just concerned with art for art's sake, but takes part in the world around her. As she remains unbound about the confessional character of this verse, for which she knows Robert's disdain, and she'll later tell Arabella, I never know them, to Robert, I feel shy about them altogether, and I've heard him express himself strongly against personal poetry, and I shrank back. Besides, she is hesitating over giving herself away in one of another. All summer, the lovers' correspondence has yawned between the impossibility and the necessity of eloping. Elizabeth panics are in proportion to the size of his step. She's particularly worried that John Kenyon, who understands both her and Robert well, will winkle out of their secret. She hates lying to him, but all her friends, it makes her feel she's swindling them. By preoccupation and itself a giveaway, by early September 46, both Mr. Boyd and Treppy, who's visiting Wimpole Street, seem to guess what's afoot. As Treppy says, secrets indeed. You think that nobody can see or hear except yourselves, I suppose, and there are two circumstances going on in the house, plain for any eyes to see. The second circumstance is Henrietta's love affair with an army ensign the family calls Surtees. Full name William Surtees Cook. He's actually a second cousin whose mother and Elizabeth's maternal grandmother were sisters. Henrietta's courtship, unlike Elizabeth's, is an open secret, not least because Surtees has seen off two her other suitors since 44. And by laying siege to Wimpole Street, the Simleys and their servants close ranks to protect the romance. He has taken up residence in the drawing room during visiting hours, breaking down in tears and generally outlasts his rival stories of time, patience, and dignity. It's dramatic stuff which quite possibly helps distract everyone from the equally intense affair being conducted altogether more discreetly on the third floor. In July 46, Elizabeth's natural aunt, Jane Headley, staying at Wimpole Street for her own daughter, Arabella's marriage, conjectures that if Henrietta and Surtees were to elope to Italy, it could take Elizabeth with them. But elopement is a radical step even for these more able-bodied lovers. Besides, Surtees lacks the money to marry. He's hoping against hope for promotion. Things have become so desperate that he has even written a novel in hopes of making money from fiction. As many an aspirant has discovered, this isn't as easy as it looks, even if, like him, you have Elizabeth Barrett as personal editor. Johnny Cheerful is submitted to Colburn, but turned down and remained unpublished. Besides, when Surtees is promoted to captain at the end of 45, he almost immediately retires from his regiment on half pay, canceling out the rise. Still, all this adds to the general undertone of plotting with which this summer 50 Wimpole Street is seen, and Anne Headley, with her beaming, affectionate face, keeps accidentally putting her foot in it. First, she teases Elizabeth in front of Papa that the investment document is her marriage settlement when she reveals to him that Robert has been visiting her niece. Meanwhile, Robert himself is feeling compromised in another way. He's desperate to tell his parents everything. Why should not my father and mother know? What possible harm can follow from them knowing? Why should I wound them in the very soul and forever? In any case, it will take my feeling for their own with implicit trust. It would also be much easier if Papa Punitive, reached in cheap, sunny southern Europe in the summer of 46, come to an end with the vertiginous feeling of now or never. If the lovers really are to sail south and Elizabeth to escape London winter, they must do so before the weather closes in. Something has to change. And suddenly, on September 9th, it does. And if to force their hand, Papa announces with characteristic lack of consultation that he moves the entire family out of the countryside because, he said, Wimpole Street need to be refurnished. Less than a fortnight later, on September 21st, the Barretts have relocated to a small Surrey village in Little Bookham. But Elizabeth isn't with them. Therefore, decide, she challenges Robert when gets the news. It seems quite too soon and too sudden for us to set out on our Italian adventure now, but her lover is tired of waiting. He understands quite well that if Elizabeth goes off to the countryside now, the window for European escape will close for another year, and maybe forever. Even if she does survive the winter cold, their relationship can only endure stasis for as long before it becomes fixed in unreality. And it takes her at her word and decides, if you do go on Monday, our marriage will be impossible for another year. The misery, you see what we have gained by waiting. We must be married directly and go to Italy. I will go to a license today and can be married on Saturday. It's not entirely out of the blue. In recent weeks, things have been getting increasingly practical. On August 5th, Elizabeth detailed her money. The interest of the nest egg of 8,000 produces an annual income of around 160, which her father doles out in the quarterly. The share Uncle Sam left in the David Lyon generate another 100 per annum. The next day, she discovered that she was around a third more than this to play with. Papa has been keeping back around 120 of her interest every year. Stormy told me this morning in answer to an inquiry of mine that certainly I did not receive the whole interest in the fund money, could not, making ever so much an allowance of the income tax, and now, upon consideration, I have seen that I cannot have done so. Stormy, and there must be 300 a year of interest from the fund money and even a low interest rate to be paid there. It will be enough to live on. Even so, Robert borrows 100 pounds from his father to meet the cost of their journey. He has finally told his parents the plan, which has been scrupulously honorable. The lovers won't elope, which will bring scandal on their families, and will marry first and only, then travel abroad as a respectably married couple, albeit secretly. Their secrecy is also protect siblings and friends from being punished by Elizabeth's father for any presumed complicity. One reason Elizabeth now decides to travel with her maid is indeed that she needs lots of practical help. She'll never even learn to do her own hair, whose barley curls, but it's also a way to protect Elizabeth Wilson from the consequence of her connivance. If I left her behind, she would be turned out in the street before sunset, Elizabeth tells Robert, while at the same time noting shrewdly that she is an expensive servant. She has 16 pounds a year. Shrewd or no, there's a real affection between Elizabeth and Wilson, who has professed herself willing to go anywhere in the world with me, and whose loyalty now proves indispensable. Just 3 days after Papa's announcement about the country move, Robert and Elizabeth are indeed married on Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning on September 12th, 1846. The witnesses are Robert's cousin, James Silverthorne, and taking a huge risk, Elizabeth Wilson. She has only Elizabeth's loyalty to protect her from the consequences of disobeying her powerful employer. Remember to thank Wilson for me, Robert injuncts his new bride that evening and again the next day. It was very kind of Wilson. However, quite the actual ceremony, it takes place in the smart Regency Parish Church in St. Marylebone, which is with an impressive pediment and broad flights of steps giving right into the Marylebone Road, could hardly be less discreet. The couple are in the sense hiding in plain sight. They're also taking care of shielding the community of nonconformist Paddington Chapel, their natural spiritual home, the more obvious place for them to marry. Its minister, the Reverend James Stratton, a congregational appointment, who, unlike the Anglican clergy of St. Marylebone, could be driven out of the furious Barrett paterfamilias. Besides, the chapel is a lifeline they mustn't endanger by now deeply religious Arabella. The logistics of the day itself are delicate. Elizabeth can only leave home unchallenged between 10 and 5 when the men are out and about. Today she waits discreetly till 10:30. That leaves her and Wilson only half an hour to get to St. Marylebone Church. It's a distance of just a third of a mile and no more than 10 minutes at a normal stroll, but Elizabeth isn't a strong walker at the best of times, and this morning, having not slept all night, she's in such a state that she nearly faints. In her fluster, she's left home without smelling salts, but she has the presence of mind to go into the chemist to buy some. She revives and, with Wilson's help, makes it into the cab rank at Marylebone High Street, where she takes a fly to the church. This is going the long way round. Church and the fly stand are roughly equidistant from 50 Whipple Street, and the fly is a crucial alibi because last night Elizabeth told Arabelle she would be taking one to call on Mr. Boyd. The ride to travel to St. Marylebone is short indeed, a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, but worth the cabbie's while because Elizabeth retains him to wait outside the church. There are days of the Book of Common Prayer, so she and Robert take their vows using the same words as innumerable couples before them. Spoken, the marriage service takes no more than half an hour, but especially in the era when marriage is a matter of material survival as well as social identity, that half hour is life-changing. For one is the more true than for Robert and Elizabeth. The pews at St. Marybone, where tablet monuments are already starting to crowd the walls, are empty as they speak their lines, but the elegant neoclassical building, still barely 30 years old, is full of the sense of the particular moneyed central London community it serves, and from which the new Mr. and Mrs. Browning are now expelled themselves vow by vow. This is not Robert's community, but it is, socially, if not spiritually, Elizabeth's. Her feelings as they emerge from the church and she makes it down the portico steps to the waiting cab must be dizzying. A year on, she recalls, it does make us laugh, for instance, to think of the officials' attitude and gesture of astonishment. And she stood at the church door and saw bride and groom, part on the best of terms, go and off in separate flies. Robert is very generous and threw out his gold to clerk, pew openers, and in a way to convict us of being in a condition of incognito. Never had he seen anything more remarkable in that in the whole course of his practice. But in the full time, full of emotion and confusion, it's not funny at all. It even looks as though Elizabeth had to supply her own ring. 2 days before the wedding, she asked Robert to call, and then you shall have the ring soon enough and safer. Now, her immediate worry is that the sensationalist journalist who can church registers looking for scandal may out the wedding. Still, she sends Wilson home and, as planned, directs a cab to near St. John's Wood, where she calls on poor Mr. Boyd in his dark little room. She's arranged for her sisters to join her there, so they'll witness her alibi, but they seem to take forever to arrive, and Elizabeth gets in such a state that Boyd, who is in on the truth, persuades her to drink some cypress wine and eat some bread and butter to keep her stomach up. And the last time she'll see her old friend, now 65, who will die less than 2 years from now, this time at least, he does right by her. At last, Arabella and Henrietta turn up in a panic and with their grave faces because Arabella has forgotten the arrangement. And once they have arrived, the sisters prolong the agony. The day's holding fair, they decide to take the carriage on for a drive to Hampstead Heath. In the 4:30, sees Elizabeth finally back in her room and writing to Robert as usual. It is only no longer as usual. This time she's writing to her husband. And from home she is renounced by marrying him. Besides, the risk of discovery and separation still aren't over and won't be till they're out of the country. Recently, Flush was kidnapped for the third time, and her brothers and lover held back. Elizabeth herself went to the Shoreditch when she saw the immense female bandit, Miss Taylor, and negotiated his release. Now the same practical determination drives her traveling plans. Papa has announced Monday, September 21st, as moving day. Is it really possible to leave before then, getting everything done in just a week? But on Thursday, just 2 days before to go, the lovers agree. Since Elizabeth can't leave the house on a Friday or Sunday, they will set out for Europe on Saturday, September 19th. Packing in this intensely scrutinizing household is almost out of the question. Robert urges Elizabeth to bring as little as possible. She can buy clothes en route. She promises to be docile about the books, dearest, to mean feet for a writer, especially for whose entire waking life has relied so disproportionately on the page. In the event, she and Wilson packed just 2 smallish bags, a light bag and a carpet bag containing only the basics, including most of her jewelry, Robert's letters, and the manuscript of the Sonnets of the Portuguese. On Friday, Wilson smuggles these out of the house and round the corner to the cab stand, where she dispatches them to the railway's companion offices, care of Robert Browning. In fact, Robert is responsible for many of these arrangements. Robert has got in such an excited muddle that he fails to realize that there are 2 different channel crossing services offered by rival companies, each with their own connecting trains. The night before their departure, Elizabeth has to correct his timing for their rendezvous, reminding him that the express train leaves Vauxhall at 5 p.m. and gets to Southampton at 8 p.m. As the railway times for September 19th record, the Southwestern Stream Packet Company's splendid and powerful ships departing from Southampton at leave Havre via Portsmouth on a scheduled twice-weekly sailing at 9 p.m. that day. Under the pressure of remaining practical, Elizabeth writes He slants and staggers down the page. Robert is unreliable just when she needs to reply on him, as if believing his long wait is over. He's taken his eye off the ball. A disproportionate amount of energy seems to be absorbing by words, the newspaper notices of the marriage, and the joint calling cards. These matter to Elizabeth too, but for purely practical reasons. Public announcement tells the world that the Brownings are legally married, not unwed lovers running away together, so she's stressed. She even snaps at Robert. Well, we will leave this little argument before the lovers leave for another day. This is How to Desire, and it will come to the end tomorrow in another day. If there's any light and truth to the lover's story of love in this world of hate and violence, have a nice day.